Welcome to the University of Wolverhampton Scenario. I'm John Traxler and I'm Professor of Digital Learning in our Institute of Education at the University of Wolverhampton, and I'm going to talk you through our scenario for the Moonlight project. Briefly, there are 4 sections and then some questions at the end, and those 4 sections are the UK context, how might various social and economic and political factors in the UK affect the reception and resources and the policy around the arrival of refugees into the UK. Then the institutional context, what is our university like, how does it differ from other universities, and how well able is it to welcome refugees into its system and help them through a degree course. Then finally, our strategy, what did we do in order to attract and recruit refugees, and what were the outcomes and the findings of the various strategies that we used. Okay, so the UK context is that the UK has, apart from anything else, a large immigrant population concentrated in specific urban areas, mainly from first, second and third generation immigrants from both the Caribbean and the Indian subcontinent, and this might be the cultural community into which refugees fit most easily and most readily. So that's one issue, considerable ethnic diversity around large immigrant populations that could well be the most convivial places for refugees to take up residence. That said, though, refugees and other migrants are often put into temporary camps whilst their applications are being processed. Which brings us on to the next point, which is that there is considerable tension between the central national government policy and priorities around migration, immigration and refugees, how they're handled and how they're prioritised, and local and regional government bodies, local and regional government authorities, their priorities and how they interpret the national policy. Over and above that, of course, the universities are themselves independent and autonomous corporations making their own decision. So you've got quite a complex patchwork, and on top of that you get input and support from voluntary sector organisations such as refugee support groups, which attempt to fill the gaps, but this can add to inconsistency and to problems with long-term planning and sustainability, and with a considerable churn in the staff and the need for ongoing training. And I guess a worry that voluntary sector organisations, or indeed local government, can quickly move on to other higher priorities after quite short times. So not much inconsistency. The institutional context is that the University of Wolverhampton operates in the centre of England, in the West Midlands, in what's called the Black Country, and this is an area characterised by low educational attainment and by an economy that used to depend on small-scale manufacturing, and so is consequently now a kind of brown belt economy. This underpins the university's mission for supporting and catalysing improved regional educational outcomes and economic regeneration. But unfortunately this is only half the picture, because like every other university, it's caught in a very competitive and volatile fees and funding environment. So the consequence of these two competing kinds of factors is that the university has to operate on really quite short-term targets, mostly financial ones and statistical ones, rather than focus on longer-term educational goals, and also to be quite risk averse and conservative, and to focus on its core market and its core audience. So this means that any innovations, for example, around relatively small communities such as refugees, can be problematic and difficult to deal with, especially as the legacy of the creation of many of the universities is a considerable proliferation of bureaucracy and departments with overlapping and competing responsibilities. So this can be quite a complex maze, for example, for refugees to navigate through. So our strategy for the MOOC project was to connect with refugee support groups in order to find out who they were supporting and to make the case that skilled refugees could well be the way to address local labour market shortages. We then went to the local government bodies responsible for labour market funding, but it turned out there were lots of overlapping jurisdictions and different interpretations of the policy in different parts of the university's catchment area, and that in fact they had no funds. So our second attempt was to print flyers and email flyers to as many refugees, refugee support groups, local government bodies as possible, pointing out the attractive and appropriate MOOCs that might help them with improved English, business skills, entrepreneurialism, and then to hope that they would pick up the suggestion that having done the MOOC, they would go to the university and try and get their learning accredited through part of the APL, Accreditation of Prior Learning process. The outcome was that we think we probably reached some refugees by this very scattergun approach, but the university has no way of tracking where applicants come from, whether they are refugees, and whether or not they've done a MOOC. So whilst I think this is a policy that we could certainly develop and find ways to monitor, at the moment we haven't managed to monitor it. So ideas for the future.